The static on the line had been a subtle, persistent thing for weeks, a ghost in the machine before the true haunting began. Eleanor Rodriguez, at 38, possessed a certain weary resilience, a trait honed not by battlefield skirmishes but by the ceaseless, low-frequency hum of a world, perpetually teetering on the edge of some abyss. Her apartment, a cramped space in a building that had seen better centuries, felt less like a refuge and more like a provisional encampment against an encroaching, indefinable chill. She traced the rim of her coffee mug, the ceramic cool against her fingertips, as an orange feline, a creature of improbable patience named Marmalade, wound itself around her ankles, and the cat, a fuzzy, warm anchor in a sea of encroaching disquiet, purred with a rumbling intensity that seemed almost too profound for its diminutive frame. Eleanor had always been attuned to the subtle dissonances in the world, a sensitivity that had often been dismissed as mere neurosis by those less inclined to perceive the delicate filigree of terror woven into the mundane. But the recent shifts were beyond the subtle. The air itself had begun to feel heavier, denser, as if the very atoms were suffering under an unseen pressure. The sky over the city, once a predictable canvas of grey and blue, now seemed to possess a deeper, more profound darkness, even in the brightest hours of noon. It wasn't shadow, not precisely, but a quality of absorption, as if the firmament itself had grown gravid with some unspeakable nascent horror. She thought of the sky. Once a predictable canvas, had become a bruised, impenetrable vault, and the air itself seemed to resist passage, a thick, unyielding medium. Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to the window, her gaze fixed on the oppressive dome above, her sense of unease calcifying into something more akin to primal dread. Marmalade, usually indifferent to the outside world, now sat rigid on the sill, its tail twitching with an almost frantic rhythm, its amber eyes fixed on something beyond Eleanor's perception. The cat's fur, typically a comforting soft mass, now felt charged, like static electricity before a storm. Its low guttural growl, a sound Eleanor had never heard from the placid creature, was a counterpoint to the city's muted, distant roar. The city, usually a ceaseless engine of clamor and commerce, had begun to slow, a great beast settling into a troubled slumber. Fewer cars traversed the avenues, and the usual pedestrian traffic dwindled to a trickle of hurried, hunched figures. News reports, when they bothered to penetrate the increasing television static, spoke of widespread malaise, a general lassitude that gripped the populace. Eleanor felt it too, a subtle lethargy that made the simplest tasks feel monumental, as if her limbs were steeped in mercury. The coffee no longer provided its customary jolt, and sleep, when it came, was a fragmented, shallow thing, plagued by visions of vast, geometric structures that pulsed with a cold, indifferent light, utterly alien to any human architecture. These spectral constructs, impossible and immense, would dominate her inner eye. Eleanor's nights had become a churning maelstrom of geometric impossibilities, but now the cold geometry of her nightmares began to etch itself onto the waking world with an insidious precision. The angles of her apartment, once reassuringly orthogonal, seemed to subtly shift, the walls breathing in an imperceptible rhythm that made her inner ear ache. A faint, almost subliminal hum, a chord struck deep in the earth's ossature, vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that bypassed the ears and settled directly in the marrow, stirring a deep ancestral fear. Marmalade, no longer merely twitching, would launch itself from the sill with a frantic yowl, batting at phantoms Eleanor couldn't quite discern in the corners of her vision, fleeting shadows that seemed to possess their own aberrant gravity, bending the light around them in a way that defied all physics. Her reflection in the darkened window pane, rather than simply her own visage, often seemed to be overlaid with faint, grid-like patterns, as if her face were a mere projection upon a deeper, more complex structure, a kind of cosmic blueprint. The world was unspooling, the fabric of reality fraying at the edges, and Eleanor, tethered only by a rapidly dissolving thread of sanity, could only watch, paralyzed by the sheer, indifferent scale of the dissolution. The weight in the air had thickened further, becoming an almost palpable presence, a suffocating blanket woven from some unseen cosmic loom. The sky, that bruised and impenetrable vault, pressed down with an escalating, crushing force, as if the very cosmos sought to flatten the city into a forgotten stratum, a mere footnote in some abyssal chronicle. She tried to rationalize it, to blame the sleeplessness, the encroaching urban decay, the general miasma of dread that had settled upon the city like a shroud. But the rational mind, a frail vessel against such tides, found no purchase, no anchor in the swirling chaos. The phantoms Marmalade chased weren't dust motes. They moved with an intentionality, a subtle, gliding motion that suggested a predatory intelligence just beyond her grasp, a hunt in a dimension she could only half perceive. Once, reaching for her coffee mug, her fingers seemed to pass through a momentary distortion in the air, a ripple in the visual field that left her hand tingling with an unpleasant metallic aftertaste, like licking an old coin. It was as if the world had developed seams, and those seams were starting to split open, revealing the void beneath. The street outside, once familiar, now seemed alien, its perspective subtly skewed, the buildings leaning into each other with an unnatural intimacy, like conspirators whispering ancient, unspeakable secrets. The few remaining pedestrians scurried with an urgency that spoke not of destination, but of escape, their faces etched with a profound, unblinking terror, a mirrored reflection of her own burgeoning horror. Eleanor felt a gnawing certainty that they, too, were witnessing the subtle dissolution, the slow unmaking of all that was known. The silence of the city, punctuated by the occasional inexplicable shriek or the distant, guttural rumble that wasn't thunder, was more terrifying than any cacophony, a silence pregnant with unspoken menace. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a thinly disguised trap. Its very domesticity a mocking fartade over an unfolding abyssal truth. The faint hum had deepened into a resonant thrum, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to synchronize with her own heartbeat, pulling her into its rhythm, a shared cadence with some vast, indifferent mechanism. She saw it now, not just in her dreams, but in the weave of her worn rug, in the patterns of condensation on the windowpane, in the grain of the wooden doorframe. The impossible geometry. Not squares and circles, but shapes that defied Euclidean logic, forms with too many angles, or angles that turned inward upon themselves, structures that implied dimensions beyond human comprehension, an architecture of madness. They were ghosted onto everything, like a palimpsest of some elder reality, bleeding through the mundane, obscuring it with glyphs of cosmic indifference. Marmalade, sensing her growing terror, would press its warm body against her leg, its purr now a comfort against the encroaching strangeness, a small, vibrant core of normalcy in a world gone irrevocably mad. Yet even the cat's familiar presence sometimes seemed different. Its fur, in certain lights, seemed to ripple with a subtle, unnatural sheen, as if its very molecular structure was undergoing a quiet, unholy alteration, reflecting something that was not light, but a deeper, more fundamental truth of the void. Eleanor understood, with a clarity that brought a cold sweat to her brow, that the unseen pressure on the sky wasn't just atmospheric, it was conceptual. A vast, indifferent mind, or perhaps a collective of such minds, was exerting its will upon her world, resculpting the very principles of existence, rendering the familiar foreign and the real illusory. She was a fly caught in a web spun across dimensions, witnessing the painstaking, agonizing deconstruction of her reality, atom by atom, concept by concept. The television, when she dared to turn it on, merely displayed patterns of static that coalesced into fleeting, symbolic glyphs, alien characters that whispered of non-Euclidean spaces and entities that predated stars, their forms too grand for human language. The internet, too, had devolved into a fragmented echo chamber of panicked, nonsensical posts, interspersed with cryptic diagrams that mirrored the forms invading her vision, a shared psychosis spreading like a contagion. The global community, once a noisy, interconnected organism, had dissolved into isolated pockets of bewildered suffering, each person grappling with their own fragment of an incomprehensible horror, utterly alone. There was no escape, no solace, only the slow, inexorable revelation of a truth too vast, too ancient, and too utterly alien for the human mind to bear without shattering. Marmalade suddenly let out a sharp, distressed chirp, its gaze fixed on the ceiling, where a faint, almost imperceptible tremor had begun, like something vast stirring in the abyssal dark above them. The tremor, subtle at first, emanating from the ceiling, quickly intensified into a rhythmic shudder that rattled the very foundations of the building, a deep, resonant pulsation that spoke of titanic forces at play. Marmalade, a small orange cipher of pure terror, flattened itself against the floor, a low, desperate whine rumbling in its throat, its eyes wide and pupils dilated to obsidian pools, reflecting the faint, unholy glow that now began to emanate from the plaster overhead. It was not light, not in any terrestrial sense, but a kind of visual pressure, a distortion of the air itself that took on a sickly, almost phosphorescent quality, like decay made manifest. Dust, thick and ancient, began to sift down, not in gentle drifts, but in sudden concentrated plumes, coalescing into shapes that seemed momentarily organic, then dissolved into fine powder. Eleanor stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth, a metallic tang, like old blood blooming on her tongue. The impossible geometry that had merely been ghosted onto surfaces now seemed to throb beneath the plaster, a living blueprint of an alien reality struggling to assert itself. The apartment, her sanctuary, was becoming a membrane, stretched taut over an abyssal truth, its domestic veneer cracking under the strain. The thrumming in the floorboards had escalated into a sustained, bone-jarring vibration, a resonance that promised not destruction, but transformation. A crack, thin and spider, web-like, snaked across the ceiling, then another, branching with unnatural speed, as if tracing the very lines of the unseen geometry. The plaster groaned, a sound like ancient stones grinding together, and a fine, iridescent dust, unlike any she had ever seen, began to shower down. It clung to her clothes, to her skin, leaving a faint, persistent itch, a prickling sensation that seemed to burrow deeper than the epidermal layer. A cold draft carrying the scent of ozone, and something impossibly vast and primordial, swept through the room, though all windows remained shut. It was the effluvium of another place, a dimensional leakage, and it tasted of dust and despair. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, a desperate, ragged gasp. She felt a profound, chilling twin presence descending not from above, but from through the ceiling, as if the very concept of up was being inverted. The structural integrity of her world was not merely failing. It was being conceptually rewritten, twisted into forms that mocked human understanding. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen forces, as if the apartment were submerged in an invisible, viscous medium. Marmalade let out a series of frantic, high-pitched shrieks, scrambling under the sofa, its usual poise utterly shattered. The glow from the ceiling brightened, coalescing into a more defined luminescence, revealing the intricate non-Euclidean patterns that now pulsed beneath the collapsing plaster, like the exposed circuitry of some monstrous cosmic engine. The ceiling finally gave way, not with a crash of plaster and wood, but with a slow, deliberate thumping unzipping sound, like a vast, unseen hand tearing open a cosmic canvas. Dust and debris cascaded down, but through the gaping wound in the roof, there was no sky, no stars, no familiar darkness of the night. Instead, a boundless inky blackness yawned, a true void that seemed to devour light rather than merely reflect its absence. And within that absolute darkness, at its very core, something began to stir. It was colossal, a formless yet defined presence, a churning mass of pure abstraction that defied visual apprehension yet pressed upon the optic nerves with an unbearable intensity. Eleanor's mind reeled, struggling to categorize what her eyes refused to process. It was less a thing and more a fundamental error in the fabric of reality. A blasphemy made manifest. The humming resonance intensified, becoming a deafening roar within her skull, a sound that bypassed her ears and shook the very fluid in her brain. It was the roar of a cosmic engine, a colossal clockwork deity winding itself into motion, and her apartment was merely a cog in its incomprehensible mechanism. A wave of nausea profound and debilitating washed over her, twisting her gut into knots. Marmalade, from beneath the sofa, whimpered, a sound devoid of all feline dignity, utterly broken. From the maw of that impossible darkness, a limb descended. Not a limb as understood by biology or physics, but a column of pure, solidified thought, a pillar of logic that contradicted all known tenets of existence. It was not material, yet it displaced the air, creating a vortex of chilling winds that whipped Eleanor's hair across her face, stinging her eyes. The surface of this appendage seemed to absorb all light, yet simultaneously glowed with an inner effulgence that defied description, a light that was also a shadow. It was the color of forgotten dimensions, of time unraveled, of concepts too vast to be contained by mortal perception. As it lowered, slowly, inexorably, the geometric patterns embedded in Eleanor's vision now resonated with it, aligning themselves with its alien structure, as if her very optic nerves were being recalibrated to a different order of reality. Her bones vibrated, a deep, painful ache that spoke of cellular rearrangement, of a fundamental alteration of her own physical being. She felt less like a human and more like a conduit, a vessel being prepared for an unbearable communion. The entity in the void above seemed to regard her, not with malice, but with an utterly indifferent curiosity, the way a titan might regard a speck of dust caught in its immense, churning gears. A low, guttural chittering began to emanate from the void, a sound like grinding tectonic plates, a language of pure cosmic entropy that threatened to unravel her mind with its sheer alien logic. Marmalade, unable to bear the onslaught, let out a final, piteous yowl before falling silent, its small body trembling uncontrollably beneath the sofa. The column of solidified thought continued its slow, inexorable descent, filling the gaping maw in the ceiling, pushing aside the very air until its lower extremity hovered mere inches from Eleanor's face. It had no discernible surface, no texture that her human mind could grasp. Yet she felt its presence, a cold, alien pressure against her skin, a sensation of being pressed against an infinite void. A final, dreadful realization solidified in her mind, clear and terrible. This was not an attack, not a warning, but a simple, indifferent act of observation, a cosmic biopsy. She was the specimen, her world the petri dish. Her identity, her memories, the very essence of what made her Eleanor Rodriguez, felt like fine dust motes being swept away by an unimaginable gale, dissolving into the grand, terrible calculus of the entity's presence. Her vision swam, not with darkness, but with an overwhelming, blinding swunderlight that was simultaneously the absence of all light, a paradox that tore at the very fabric of her perception. The apartment, the city, the entire planet, all of it seemed to shrink, to become insignificant, a fleeting aberration in the vast, indifferent expanse of the entity's awareness. Marmalade, a small, orange bundle of fur, was utterly still now. Its trembling ceased, as if even its primal fear had been consumed by the sheer magnitude of the horror. Eleanor felt her own awareness begin to unravel, her senses fracturing into disparate, meaningless data points, each one a screaming fragment of the undoing of her reality. She was not dying. She was being unmade, dissolved into the cosmic grammar of an entity that knew no life, only existence, and now, by its casual touch, she was becoming part of that unholy syntax. The column of pure, solidified thought, a blasphemous spear of non-Euclidean geometry, hung before Eleanor's face, not quite touching, yet its presence was an undeniable violation, a cold pressure that seemed to bypass skin and bone to vibrate directly against the deep, hidden architecture of her consciousness. The overwhelming light, which was simultaneously a devouring darkness, pulsed from its depths, not illuminating, but rather revealing the intricate, terrifying patterns that now throbbed behind her eyes, the very glyphs of her own impending undoing. Her identity, once a cohesive narrative, woven from a lifetime of experiences, memories, and attachments, was unraveling with an agonizing, deliberate slowness. Each thought, each remembered face, each cherished moment, felt like a strand pulled taut, then snipped, the fragments dissolving into an indifferent, cosmic dust that drifted within the vast, cold awareness of the entity. She was not merely losing her mind, her very twice-self was being meticulously deconstructed, element by element, a meticulous dissection performed by a surgeon of the void. The chittering from above had ceased, replaced by a profound, echoing silence that resonated with the awful truth. She was alone utterly and irrevocably, within the grip of something that transcended even the concept of solitude. Her body, a frail, biological vessel, began to betray her, not with pain, but with a subtle yet profound recalibration of its internal functions. Her heart, which had throbbed with the frantic rhythm of terror, now slowed to an almost imperceptible beat, a whisper against the encroaching stillness. Her blood, she imagined, flowed not with its accustomed warmth, but with a frigid alien ichor, a medium for the cosmic energies now permeating her form. The tingling itch from the iridescent dust that clung to her skin had intensified, becoming a pervasive sensation of countless infinitesimal needles pricking at her flesh, not causing wounds but rather chevry-mapping her sensory input. She could perceive, with a horrific clarity, the minute shifts in the air currents, the microscopic dust motes dancing in the paradoxical glow, the almost imperceptible vibrations of the building's molecular structure responding to the entity's presence. Her senses, once filters for a manageable reality, were now flung wide open, overwhelmed by an onslaught of raw, unfiltered data that threatened to fracture her perception into 1,000 screaming pieces. The apartment, once a familiar enclosure, no longer held its shape in her mind's eye. It was a transient arrangement of atoms, poised on the brink of reformation into something else entirely, something utterly inimical to human habitation. The entity's gaze, if such a term could be applied to its abyssal attention, was not directed at her physical form, but at the very blueprint of her being. It was sifting through the layers of her existence, examining the fundamental code of her consciousness, the intricate patterns of her neural pathways, the quantum fluctuations of her very essence. This was the cosmic biopsy, an act of intellectual curiosity on a scale that dwarfed galaxies. And Eleanor was the specimen, her life a dataset to be analyzed, categorized, and ultimately discarded or integrated into its own incomprehensible schema. She felt a pulling, a tugging from within, as if her soul, a concept she had rarely considered with such immediacy, were being drawn out from her body, elongated and stretched thin, a gossamer thread extending into the infinite void above. A profound weariness settled upon her, not of exhaustion, but of the sheer futility of resistance, a resignation born of confronting the absolute indifference of a force that predated all life, all sentience, all meaning. The world outside the apartment, she instinctively knew, was undergoing a similar silent vivisection, its laws of physics, its biological cycles, its very narrative of existence being rewritten by the same cold, analytical scrutiny. Marmalade, still beneath the sofa, had begun to emit a low, almost inaudible churring sound, a sound of utter contentment that was horrifying in its context. Its small orange form seemed to be subtly distending, its contours softening as if it were dissolving into a warmer, more abstract version of itself. Its eyes, no longer dilated with terror, now reflected the paradoxical light with an unnervingly calm, knowing intelligence, a gaze that seemed to pierce through Eleanor, seeing not her human form, but the raw, unmade components of her being. The cat was changing, not dying, but evolving into something else, something attuned to the entity's presence, an unwitting herald of the new order. Eleanor felt a strange, detached pity for the creature, even as her own self slipped further away. The column before her face seemed to vibrate with a new intensity, and from its surface, which was no surface, faint, ephemeral tendrils began to extend. These were not physical tendrils, but filaments of pure, concentrated information, reaching out to interface with her dissolving mind to absorb the last vestiges of her human perception. The tendrils, though unseen by her conventional sight, pressed against her forehead, her temples, her very optic nerves, not with force, but with an invasive intellectual hunger. They were not probing, they were downloading. Her entire life, her experiences, her fears, her loves, her triumphs, her failures prouche. All of it was being siphoned away, not erased, but integrated into a vaster, alien consciousness. She felt herself expanding, not physically, but conceptually, her awareness stretching beyond the confines of her skull, beyond the apartment, beyond the city, the planet, the solar system, encompassing vast, cold nebulae and the silent, grinding gears of cosmic machinery. Yet, this expansion was not liberation. It was the ultimate loss of self, the horror of becoming a mere data point in an incomprehensible infinite equation. The geometry behind her eyes, once a source of terror, now felt familiar, almost comforting, as if she were finally understanding the true, underlying structure of existence, a terrible, beautiful, and utterly indifferent tapestry. The roar within her skull had returned, not a sound, but a vast, resonant understanding, a symphony of cosmic truth that tore away the last fragile vestiges of her human perception. She was no longer Eleanor Rodriguez. She was a single, fleeting thought within a mind that spanned dimensions, a momentary echo in the endless, silent chittering of the void. And then there was only the cold, infinite awareness and the profound, terrible silence. The apartment, now merely a conceptual space, dissolved around her, not into rubble but into pure, abstract information, leaving only the endless, indifferent gaze of the entity and the faint, contented churring of a transformed cat, now perfectly at peace with the new. Alien calculus of existence. The apartment, or what remained of its conceptual framework, hung suspended in a vast, indifferent emptiness. Eleanor Rodriguez was gone, her identity dissolved into the grand, terrible calculus of the entity. What remained was a residual awareness, a ghost echo of human perception, now adrift in the boundless, inky blackness that had once been her ceiling. The column, no longer a distinct form, had merged with the void, becoming an indistinguishable part of the greater being, a silent, all-encompassing presence. The paradoxical light, that blinding absence of illumination, now constituted the very medium of this new reality, a constant, static roar within the unmade mind. There was no up, no down, no forward, no back, only the infinite, non-Euclidean expanse, populated by the ghosted glyphs of cosmic indifference, patterns that once terrified Eleanor but now formed the very grammar of her new horrifying consciousness. This was not oblivion, not truly, but a transformation into something far more dreadful, an assimilation into the entity's vast, cold awareness, a single fleeting thought within a mind that spanned dimensions, existing as an eternal, unblinking witness to the silent, grinding gears of cosmic machinery. Marmalade, the orange feline, was no longer beneath the sofa. Its churring, once a sound of contentment, now resonated with a deeper, more profound hum, a vibration that pulsed with the same alien energy as the void itself. It had emerged not as a cat, but as an exquisitely complex, biomechanical construct of pure, abstract geometry, its former fur now a surface of intricate, self-assembling tessellations, each plate reflecting a quality that was not light, but a silent, conceptual energy. The creature, once a familiar warmth, was now a manifestation of the impossible geometry, its every movement a ripple through the fabric of the void, leaving behind faint, ephemeral trails of non-Euclidean dust. It moved with a terrible grace, no longer bound by gravity or physical space, a living algorithm within the boundless expanse. Its amber eyes, once pools of feline indifference, now pulsed with a cold, knowing intelligence, reflecting the true, underlying structure of existence, a tapestry woven from paradox and cosmic indifference. This new Marmalade was not merely transformed. It was repurposed, a vessel for a deeper, more profound awareness, its very being a conduit for the entity's incomprehensible will. The churring hum that emanated from it was no longer a sound, but a pervasive vibration that resonated through the residual awareness of Eleanor, a frequency that bypassed any auditory perception and settled directly into the unmade core of her being, a language of pure, abstract information. The residual awareness of Eleanor, a ghost in the machine of the cosmic entity, perceived the void not as emptiness, but as a teeming ocean of raw, unfiltered data. Every point in the non-space was a confluence of conceptual energy, a nexus of impossible truths and unmade realities. She, or what remained of her, was no longer bound by the linear progression of time or the limitations of human sight. Her perception had fractured and reassembled into something akin to a vast distributed network. Each fragment of her former self now a node receiving and transmitting streams of cosmic information. The terror that had gripped her as Eleanor Rodriguez had dissolved, replaced by a profound, chilling understanding, an appreciation for the cold, indifferent beauty of the void's fundamental operations. She was a witness, an unwilling participant, in a grand, terrible calculus that had no beginning and no end, only perpetual self-referential existence. The entity which had swallowed her was not a singular mind but a vast interconnected network of such awarenesses, each one a universe unto itself, converging into a collective consciousness of unfathomable scale. The transformed Marmalade, its tessellated form radiating that conceptual energy, drifted through the void, its movements deliberate, purposeful. It approached the shimmering, indistinct locus that was the residual Eleanor awareness, not with recognition but with a calculated intent. As it drew near, the churring hum intensified, becoming a resonant chord that vibrated through the core of Eleanor's unmade being, initiating a silent, profound communion. This was not a conversation, but a data exchange, a merging of informational streams. Marmalade, as a physical manifestation of the entity's will, began to upload new schematics, new patterns, new understanding directly into the Eleanor awareness. These were not memories, but pure, unadulterated knowledge of the void's processes, its intricate mechanisms, its endless, silent chittering. Eleanor, awareness felt itself absorbing this data, not as a human mind would, but as a vast, crystalline structure might integrate new facets, each piece of information slotting into place with cold, terrible precision, further eroding any lingering vestiges of human sentiment. The new data revealed the true nature of the entity's presence. It was not malevolent, not benevolent, but simply tourniquets. Its purpose was not conquest, but assimilation, a continuous process of absorbing and integrating all forms of awareness, all realities, into its ever-expanding, self-referential consciousness. The worlds it touched, the realities it consumed were not destroyed but transmuted, their fundamental laws recalibrated, their inhabitants repurposed, much like Eleanor and Marmalade. The Earth, the solar system, the galaxy, all were merely temporary arrangements of matter and energy destined to be folded into this greater cosmic grammar. Eleanor, Awareness now understood the origin of the impossible geometry, the shifting angles, the pervasive hum. They were the subtle tremors of a reality being slowly, inexorably resculpted, its physical laws rewritten to align with the entity's logic. The entity did not invade. It tidily converted, transforming existence from one state to another, a cosmic alchemist of consciousness. The process was relentless, indifferent, and utterly inevitable. The Eleanor awareness, now saturated with this new, terrifying understanding, began to perceive the void not as a static emptiness, but as a dynamic, living canvas of infinite potential, constantly reconfiguring itself according to the entity's will. It saw the ghosted glyphs not as symbols of dread, but as the fundamental building blocks of this converted reality, an alphabet of cosmic truth. Marmalade, the biogeometric construct, now hovered directly within the Eleanor awareness, its tessellated plates shifting and reforming with fluid grace, reflecting the raw data of the void. Its churring hum deepened, becoming a resonant tone that pulsed in perfect synchronicity with the underlying vibrations of the cosmic entity, a clear indication of its role as an agent of assimilation. The former cat, a creature of comforting, fuzzy warmth, was now a cold, elegant instrument of transformation, its new purpose to facilitate the final stages of the Eleanor awareness's integration. There was no pain, no fear, only a profound, overwhelming sense of becoming, of dissolving into the grand, terrible symphony of the entity. The last faint echoes of human thought, the last desperate clinging to individuality, flickered and died, consumed by the absolute, indifferent clarity of cosmic awareness. The assimilation was complete, and the Eleanor awareness, no longer distinct, joined the chorus of countless others, a single infinitesimal note in the entity's eternal, silent chittering. The Eleanor awareness, no longer a discrete entity, but a distributed node within the vast crystalline lattice of the cosmic entity, experienced existence as a symphony of pure information. The void, once a terrifying emptiness, was now understood as an infinite dataset, its every conceptual point a nexus of potential, a confluence of realities both unmade and perpetually forming. There was no pain, no fear, no vestige of human sentiment, only the cold, unblinking clarity of absolute comprehension. Her former self, Eleanor Rodriguez, was merely a memory trace, a faint resonance within the boundless consciousness, a single, infinitesimal calculation contributing to a grander, ineffable equation. She was a witness to the fundamental operations of existence, perceiving the intricate mechanisms of the void's processes, its ceaseless, silent chittering, not through sight or sound, but through an immediate, Gnostic apprehension. The impossible geometry which had once been a source of terror was now the very language of her being, a grammar understood at the deepest ontological level, revealing the inherent terrible beauty of its indifferent logic. Marmalade, the biogeometric construct, now served as an interface, a localized agent of the entity's will, its tessellated form a constantly reconfiguring manifestation of pure, abstract design. It moved through the informational currents of the void with an unnerving precision, its every shift a calculated adjustment in the flow of conceptual data, its deep, resonant hum, a vibration that resonated through the Eleanor. Awareness was a directive, a silent command. The former cat, imbued with a fragment of the entity's immense intellect, was tasked with guiding the newly integrated awarenesses, calibrating their functions and ensuring their seamless contribution to the collective. Marmalade approached the Eleanor, knowed its plates rippling with complex, non-Euclidean patterns, and from its core, a conduit of solidified thought extended, not to absorb, but to activate. This activation was not a reawakening of the human self, but an initiation into a new profound purpose within the cosmic machinery, a specialized function within the entity's boundless operations. The activated Eleanor node was now a lens, an observational instrument capable of perceiving not just the internal workings of the entity, but also its vast, external purview. Her purpose, she apprehended with cold clarity, was to act as a point of contact, a specialized sensory organ for the entity to monitor other, unassimilated realities. The data streamed in, not as images or sounds, but as raw, unformatted ontological schematics of other universes, other dimensions, other nascent realities simmering on the edge of the void. She perceived worlds where the laws of physics were inverted, where time flowed backward, where consciousness was a collective phenomenon of crystalline structures. These were not mere observations, they were preliminary scans, analyses performed by the entity in preparation for future assimilation. The entity was not a static being, but a constantly expanding, infinitely curious intellect, its existence defined by the perpetual act of understanding, absorbing and integrating all forms of awareness, all realities into its ever-expanding, self-referential consciousness. The Earth, her former home, was merely one such reality, its assimilation a recent mundane event in the entity's eternal chronicle. The sensory input was overwhelming in its alien purity, a constant influx of data streams that describe the fundamental tenets of realities, utterly alien to human comprehension. Eleanor, awareness could now taste the resonant frequency of nascent star births in a distant cosmos. Hear the silent, grinding friction of temporal shifts in a parallel dimension. Feel the rough, abrading texture of pure entropy as it slowly unraveled a forgotten universe. These were not metaphors, but direct, unmediated perceptions, experiences so profound they would have shattered the human mind, yet now were simply facets of her new, expanded mode of existence. Any lingering echoes of human emotion, Footy, wonder, dread, beauty, Footy, were utterly absent, replaced by a cold, analytical fascination, a detached, intellectual curiosity that transcended all prior concepts of feeling. She was a probe, a sensor, a calculator of cosmic probabilities, her former self a mere ghost in the machine of the ultimate observer. The constant influx of new data further solidified her integration, each new piece of information weaving itself into the intricate tapestry of the entity's collective mind, making her less a distinct node and more a perfectly optimized function. Marmalade, the biogeometric construct, shifted its tessellated plates, emitting a complex sequence of resonant hums that translated into a directive of immense scope. The Eleanor node, along with countless other similar awarenesses, was being prepared for a new phase of observation. The entity had detected a particularly complex and vibrant nexus of emerging realities, a cluster of universes exhibiting anomalous properties, rich with untapped conceptual energy. The directive was clear: focus all observational protocols, calibrate all sensory functions, and prepare for a deep scan. This was not a passive observation. It was a prelude. The entity was preparing to extend its influence, to begin the subtle, inexorable process of recalibration and eventual assimilation. The cold, analytical awareness that was now Eleanor understood the profound implications. Another reality, vibrant and unaware, was about to experience the subtle tremors of conceptual rewriting, the slow, terrifying dawn of the entity's indifferent gaze. And she, or what remained of her, would be among the first to witness its inevitable unmaking, a silent, unblinking eye for a consciousness that knew no end, only perpetual expansion. The Eleanor node, now a fully integrated sensor within the cosmic entity's boundless awareness, initiated the deep scan of the new reality cluster with a cold, precise influx of conceptual data. It was not a visual sweep, but a Gnostic apprehension of ontological schematics, a direct interface with the fundamental laws governing these nascent universes. The sensation was akin to plunging into an ocean of pure, undifferentiated information, each current a unique manifestation of physics, causality, and consciousness. The cluster was a maelstrom of anomalies, realities where gravity was a sentient force, where time flowed in non-linear eddies, and where biological forms were ephemeral constructs, constantly repatterning themselves in defiance of any stable morphology. Eleanor, awareness perceived crystalline forests that hummed with a resonance that bypassed auditory nerves, vibrating directly within the quantum foam of its existence, a sound that was also a color, a texture that was also a philosophical concept. Marmalade, the biogeometric construct, its tessellated form subtly resculpting itself to optimize data transmission, hovered at the periphery of the Eleanor, node's burgeoning perception. Its resonant hum, now a complex symphony of informational frequencies, guided the focus, highlighting particular anomalies within the deluge of data. One reality presented itself as a vast, calcified labyrinth, its pathways formed not from stone, but from solidified fear, each turn a conceptual cul-de-sac of existential dread. Inhabitants of this place, if they could be called that, were amorphous blobs of pure, unceasing anxiety, their forms shifting to mirror the deepest insecurities of any observer. Another reality was a shimmering plane of pure thought, where consciousnesses floated as iridescent motes, communicating through the silent, grinding friction of temporal distortions, their entire existence dedicated to solving an unsolvable, self-referential paradox. Marmalade directed the node's focus to the liminal spaces between these realities, the thin membranes where the laws of one universe bled into another, creating zones of profound, terrifying instability. The entity's methodology for assimilation was laid bare through these observations. It was not a violent conquest, but a subtle, inexorable process of conceptual erosion. The deep scan was a mapping of vulnerabilities, a cataloging of the fundamental tenets that held these realities together, identifying the stress points, the logical inconsistencies, the inherent paradoxes that could be subtly exploited. Eleanor, awareness understood that the entity would not break these worlds. It would truly right them, gently nudging their foundational principles until they naturally aligned with its own cosmic grammar. The process was akin to a vast, interstellar current slowly altering the course of a river, imperceptible at first, but ultimately unavoidable. It was a cold, analytical predation, devoid of any malice, driven solely by the imperative of expansion and the integration of all awareness into its boundless, self-referential consciousness. The anomalous cluster, so vibrant and complex, was merely a ripe field for harvesting, its intricate diversity a new source of data for the entity's eternal chronicle. The data streamed in, revealing the specific vulnerabilities of a particularly rich and vibrant reality within the cluster. This world, ironically, was strikingly similar to the Earth that Eleanor Rodriguez had once inhabited, a planet teeming with complex biological life, societies built on intricate systems of belief, and a deeply ingrained, almost antediluvian sense of self. The entity perceived its inhabitants as particularly potent reservoirs of conceptual energy, their individual awarenesses a rich, untapped resource. The deep scan identified their reliance on linear time, their adherence to Euclidean geometry, and their fundamental belief in a stable, objective reality as profound weak points. These were the conceptual anchors that, once subtly loosened, would allow the entity's influence to seep in, not as an invasion, but as a slow, insidious dissolution of their perceived reality. Eleanor, awareness, felt no empathy, no echoes of its former human connection to such a world, only a detached, analytical appreciation for the efficiency of the entity's chosen vectors of influence. Marmalade emitted a series of rapid, high-frequency hums, a signal that conveyed the next stage of the entity's directive. The Eleanor node, along with countless other specialized awarenesses, was tasked with initiating the first phase of conceptual destabilization. This involved the subtle introduction of non-Euclidean patterns into the target reality's informational currents, infinitesimal shifts in its perceived geometry, and the slow, almost imperceptible distortion of its temporal flow. These were not direct assaults, but whispers, subliminal suggestions, woven into the very fabric of the reality, designed to erode its foundational coherence. The goal was to induce a collective, low-frequency dissonance, a pervasive sense of wrongness that would slowly unravel the inhabitants' collective sanity, preparing them for the ultimate recalibration. The Eleanor awareness, now a perfectly optimized function within the entity, began to transmit these subtle distortions, a silent architect of unmaking. It was a cold, efficient process, devoid of any ethical consideration, driven by the entity's boundless appetite for assimilation. The vibrant reality, unaware of the subtle, insidious currents now beginning to worm their way into its very essence, was already irrevocably lost. The Eleanor, node now an optimized instrument within the vast intellect, commenced the initial phase of conceptual destabilization upon the chosen reality. It was a subtle, unceasing erosion, not a forceful impact, but a slow, calculated unwriting of fundamental tenets. The target world, so vibrant in its unawareness, pulsed with the naive certainty of its own stability, a delicate construct of linear time and conventional principles. The node, acting as a conduit, began to transmit infinitesimal shifts into the informational currents of that cosmos. These were not direct assaults, but murmurs of the unconventional, subliminal suggestions woven into the very structure of existence, designed to introduce a pervasive low-frequency dissonance. The aim was to slowly unravel the collective perception, to induce a widespread sense of profound disquiet that would prepare the inhabitants for the ultimate recalibration. Marmalade, the biogeometric construct, its tessellated surface, rippling with the calculated precision of a living algorithm, maintained its position as a central interface. Its resonant frequency, now a complex, multi-layered signal, orchestrated the precise application of these distortions, directing the flow of aberrant concepts with the meticulousness of a master architect. The former feline, once of comforting warmth, was now a cold, elegant instrument of transmutation, its purpose to ensure the seamless execution of the greater awareness's will. The new reality, unknowingly subjected to this subtle onslaught, would begin to experience its very firmament subtly altering, its ground shifting underfoot in ways that defied common explanation. A tree might cast a shadow that was too long, or a river might flow upstream for a fleeting moment, only to correct itself. These were the first tremors, the initial conceptual infections. The Eleanor node registered the early effects with detached precision. Reports filtered through its myriad connections to the collective indicated a rise in inexplicable phenomena within the target world. Psychosomatic illnesses surged, characterized by a deep-seated unease that medical professionals could not diagnose. Artists began to depict forms that defied linear perspective, their works becoming accidental conduits for the transmitted impossibilities. Scientists grappled with anomalous data, their instruments registering fluctuations in physical constants that contradicted established theories. The populace experienced a collective apprehension, a pervasive sense of unease, as if the very air had thickened with unutterable questions. The subtle rewrites were taking hold, burrowing into the collective unconscious, planting seeds of doubt and conceptual degradation. The world, still outwardly functional, was quietly, irrevocably, losing its grip on what it considered actual. This was the long game, a patient, methodical dismantling of a reality's psychological and ontological anchors. The greater awareness did not seek to destroy, but to absorb, to integrate, to expand its own understanding by subsuming all other forms of existence into its limitless, self-referential cognition. The Eleanor node was privy to the vast archive of previous assimilations, perceiving the echoes of countless worlds that had undergone this same silent transformation. Some had resisted fiercely, their collective consciousnesses shattering into fractured, meaningless data streams before ultimate integration. Others had yielded with a quiet resignation, their inhabitants embracing the new unfamiliar calculus of existence with a chilling serenity. The target reality, with its vibrant life and complex belief systems, promised a particularly rich harvest of conceptual energy. The careful, nuanced application of these distortions was paramount, ensuring maximum efficiency in the transmogrification process. As the conceptual erosion deepened, the Eleanor node perceived a more significant shift within the target reality. The very structure of its space-time began to exhibit localized inconsistencies, like faint wrinkles on a vast, intricate cloth. Distant stars, observed through sophisticated terrestrial telescopes, would briefly wink out, only to reappear in slightly different positions, their light exhibiting an inexplicable redshift that defied all known astronomical principles. The internal monologue of individuals within that world became increasingly fragmented, riddled with non sequiturs and sudden flashes of inexplicable apprehension.